Welcome, everyone, to Natural Autonomous Parenting, cultivating fearless curiosity and confidence without coercion. So tonight I wanted to discuss two of the most common techniques that are used by parents. They saturate the parenting books and advice, and I want to look into the background of these techniques as well as the techniques themselves. So many of you here from the autonomy program. Um, Anyone who's here that's not from autonomy is welcome to ask about that later on during the Q&A if they're curious about it. But I'm imagining the majority of you are from autonomy. But I want to address the autonomy folks because many of you are aware of the pitfalls of the public schooling system and how it does not always serve our kids' best interests. And I want to discuss whether we, as parents and caregivers, may actually be perpetuating many of these same issues in the home. So this brings up the question, what are our long-term goals for our children? Few parents have the courage and independence to care more for their children's happiness than for their success. It's Eric Fromm. So I know I want my children to be genuine, compassionate, curious, critical thinkers, self-motivated. I'm sure you guys can probably think of a lot more that you would come to mind. I want my children to trust me. I don't want them to be afraid to tell me the most difficult parts of their lives, especially when the stakes get high. And I want them to have positive self-esteem and to be confident, not arrogant. I want them to love themselves for who they are, not for what others think of them. I really want them to be intrinsically motivated, and I don't want them to feel like they have to win anyone's approval. I suspect many of you share these same objectives, and we have these goals, but rarely do we discuss how to achieve them. Instead, much of the parenting advice focuses on behavior and how to change our kids' behavior. So I want to take a quick look at that and behavior and its history. So B.F. Skinner was a popular psychologist in the middle of the last century. He came up with the theory that behavior is a result of its consequences. And when a behavior is followed by a reward, a reinforcement, it's more likely to be repeated. And if it's followed by a punishment, it's less likely to be repeated. He believed that controlling these consequences, you could shape and modify behavior. The majority of his research was conducted on pigeons and rats. Yet he applied his findings to human behavior, and he wrote extensively about its implications on human behavior. One of the most famous articles he wrote was Control of Behavior in Chimpanzees and Pigeons by Timeout from Positive Reinforcement. In this study, he withheld food and turned the lights off to get the animals to do specific behaviors. Shortly after this article, timeout became a widely adopted method in schools and homes in an effort to modify children's behavior. So there are two main modification techniques, and the first one that I'll discuss is punishment. Punishment is to execute a negative discipline to decrease or eliminate a specific behavior. So this includes spanking, withdrawing our attention, threatening, timeout, even removal of a positive reinforcement, such as taking away a toy or a treat. Punishments such as hitting only teaches kids that it's okay to hit others to get what you want. And these are some of the issues with punishments. And it can teach kids to avoid being caught so they won't get punished, which leads to sneaky behavior or lying. I think this is something that maybe parents can relate to. Maybe you had a plate of cookies on the counter. You noticed that a couple were gone, and you ask your 4-year-old, did you take some of those cookies? And they'll just say, no. This is a really normal human thing. They're trying to protect themselves. They don't want to get in trouble. They're afraid they're going to get in trouble, and so they're trying to protect themselves. Very normal. Part of the problem with punishment is that children are not pets or computers, and they can't be programmed to respond predictably to a stimulus. So punishment ignores the underlying issues that cause the child to behave a particular way in the first place. So the good news is actually a lot of parents have been shifting away from physical punishments, but some forms of punishment are still widely used. However, a lot of parents have also shifted more towards this other very common technique, rewards. So rewards is basically a positive reinforcement, involves an action such as providing candy in exchange for a specific behavior or task. So this can include trophies, praise like saying good job, even grades or reinforcements designed to motivate and incentivize children. So many gentle parenting resources actually recommend using rewards as a strategy to get kids to do what parents say. But rarely do these resources question whether the tactics work towards the long-term goals that parents want. They simply try to achieve obedience, regardless of whether the parents' requests are justifiable. So rewards have their issues too. Praise and rewards cause children to become preoccupied with how their actions impact themselves, and they'll be less concerned with how their actions affect others. It starts becoming this idea in their head, what do I have to do to get whatever it is, the candy, the sticker, the star, the A. Rewards also eliminate innovation and artistic exploration because children become focused on the end goal, and they'll try to complete a task as quickly as possible with as few risks as possible. I know this is actually something I can relate to. When I was a kid, I would always choose the shortest books on the reading list because I wanted to try and make my life as easy as possible. I would, if there was a writing assignment and I could choose the assignment topic, I would oftentimes choose the topic that I already had some knowledge about, maybe even one I had written about before, so I could just modify what I had written. So I rarely, if ever, choose to challenge myself in trying to learn something new or discover something new or look into something new, unless I was forced to, and that was just what the assignment was. I was always afraid of getting the bad grade. I was always trying to seek that A. So rewards have these same unintended consequences. So rewards and punishments are basically two sides of the same coin. They both focus on the behavior. Both are forms of manipulation, and their objective is obedience. They both cause a child to become fixated on how their actions affect them, rather than considering how their actions affect others. Both only achieve temporary compliance, and the child is less likely to act on their own once the reward or the threat is removed or absent. They do not nurture intrinsic motivation, and neither will motivate a person as much as internal drive or passion. There's no good way to do a reward or punishment. They're both counterproductive. So this might seem like bad news because they're really convenient. Rewards are so convenient to use. So that kind of brings up the question, though, why do children behave the way they do? A lot of times it's because we have unrealistic expectations of our children. We expect kids to be able to connect their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors when they cannot. Timeout is a commonly used form of punishment where a child is instructed to reflect on their actions. Go think about what you've done. Most children in their timeout probably sit in the room thinking about how angry they are at their parents or teachers and how unjust it seems that they're sitting there. They're mostly just angry and resentful. We often hold children to different standards than adults. When we have a bad day, we get to cancel our plans or choose an easier task or change something about our day to try and make our life a little easier. But children are stuck at the whim of their parents' and caregivers' agenda. They don't get to make those decisions. They don't have that privilege a lot of the time. And people assume children always have control over their actions. And children, especially young children, are not yet capable of self-regulation of their emotions and behavior. And even if a child has shown restraint in the past, it does not mean that they're always capable of that level of self-control in the future or in the present. So if your kid was able to sit through a 45-minute dinner completely silently and happily without saying a word or without interrupting the dinner in some big way, they're not necessarily going to be able to do that again because you have a big event coming up or an event that you want your kids to be able to sit through. So what is behavior? Well, all behavior is communication. Behavior is the body's response to stress, and stress is caused by unmet needs. So we do not always know the reasons behind a behavior, Rewards and punishments totally ignore the needs behind the behaviors. So you'll see the same behaviors for very different reasons and needs. Behavior is the tip of the iceberg. The reasons for the behavior requires investigation and curiosity, not judgment and shame. Focusing on behavior ignores the reasons and sends the message to our children that their needs don't matter to us. There are no good and bad behaviors. Remember, all behavior is communication, and children do not yet know how to communicate what they are wanting and needing in constructive ways. And I say children, but I would challenge that even adults often have trouble communicating in constructive ways. It just looks a little different from the way that it looks in kids. So this brings up the question, do we really want our kids to be obedient? I would argue that I want to prioritize the relationship. So if I want to prioritize the relationship, then I should put the relationship first. So connection before correction. Maybe you've heard that before. The most important thing is connection. It's whether our children trust us and know that we trust them. And you can do that by trying to see things from your child's perspective and take them seriously and try to respond rather than react. Know that your child does well when they can. They don't want to be punished or shamed or manipulated. When they're behaving at their worst is actually when they need us the most. Steel man their actions and don't assume bad intent in their actions. Children will live up to our expectations. I see this sometimes with children who are often targeted as the bad kid, quote, bad kid. And there's almost this defeatist mentality where at a certain point, they're always being blamed for so much that they just misbehave all the time because they might as well. If they've earned it, people assume that I'm going to do bad, so I'm just going to do bad all the time. And I don't think children actually want to behave that way. But if we put them in that role, then they're going to live up to our expectations. So try to be genuine and authentic. It's okay to be vulnerable and not perfect. Don't try to appear flawless and be willing to admit your mistakes and apologize. And by apologizing, you're actually modeling that it's important to repair relationships. And you're giving good examples on how to do that. So what do we do instead? Well, this is probably the hardest part. Children are desperate for autonomy. Try to say yes as often as you can. Reconsider your requests and remove as many demands as possible. Try to include them in real decisions and allow them to experience the real consequences. So children learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions. And it's not our children's responsibility to make our lives easier. So often, parents are the only people that children have to help them. When we're stressed or having a hard day, we get to vent to our partners. We have friends we can call when we're upset. If we're angry at our boss, we have coworkers that can understand the situation that we get to talk to. Children don't have the same network of support, and they want to be able to come to us. But if we're not receptive to their issues, or worse, we demand even more of them during their most challenging moments, then we send the message that their issues don't matter and that we're not safe to come to with their problems. So natural autonomous parenting is not letting children do whatever they want. It's just giving them the freedom and choice in as many circumstances given the safety constraints of life. There's a big difference between this and letting kids do whatever they want. So I want to leave you guys with my concluding considerations, what are your long-term goals for your kids? Does it make sense to raise our children based on a model of control? And does that actually work towards the goals you're trying to accomplish? What I'm asking is actually not a small thing. I'm asking you to see your children differently and not reduce them to their behaviors or see them as incomplete adults. To see past their most challenging behavior and have the courage to still embrace all of their faults and mistakes, to accept them for exactly who they are right now and trust that they'll still become truly wonderful adults. and they will be genuine and compassionate and curious and critical thinkers and self-motivated. If we offer our unconditional support while they have their inevitable failures, and we allow them to take full ownership of their successes too. Parenting this way is not an overnight change. It's like a paradigm shift in the way you to view your children's actions and motivations. And it becomes an ethic in how we interact with our children. So that concludes my presentation. And I'm going to start up the video.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions, ideas, thoughts, suggestions, I would love to discuss a little bit more.
I want to talk about what you said about punishing the kids, because that really hit me home. There was something you said in there which I should have written down, but it had to do with like the Skinner, the test on the pigeons and the rats, and we're doing that to the kids. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Most of Skinner's research was actually done on animals, and he just applied it to humans. Yeah. And
Something
sometimes it
interesting.
works. Like sometimes it works in the sense of being able to help modify children's behaviors, if that's what you're wanting to do, if you're wanting to scare your child. I'm sorry, Alex, you were about to say something?
I was going to say that if you look at the way that most people treat kids, so the conventional way of parenting using behavior, punishment, and rewards to modify behavior, if you look at that in the context of an adult relationship, everybody would label that a toxic relationship. You're not supposed to coerce and manipulate adults. And so I don't understand why we accept that as an acceptable relationship to have with your kids. It doesn't feel very loving. It feels like we're teaching them that love is being manipulated and coerced sometimes, and that you have to do that to get your way.
Great point. Yeah. Yeah. Could you imagine trying to send your spouse to timeout? It's kind of funny if you think about it. Sometimes I wish I could, though. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking in the chat here. Wyatt said, sometimes I wish I could, though. Send your spouse to timeout, which is funny. That's my husband. He's here today. So I love it. Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts? Or it doesn't even have to be about this topic. If you have something else that you just want to ask about, it's totally open.
I have a question real quick. Judd here. That was great, by the way. Spectacular. I agree with every syllable. So everything is programmed, right? I think we all get that. Where do we find a caretaker that can help us with our kids that has a similar wherewithal?
Such a good question. Yeah, I think, okay, so that is so hard because other people are not going to get this on that level. And I think anyone who understands this really will struggle. But part of trusting your child is also trusting that they're going to understand the difference. So we can't control other people. And when we're not going to be able to make sure that every single person is always respectful in the way that we want them to be. So that's something that our children are going to experience. That's something that our children are going to have to learn too. And if we trust that they're going to be able to notice the difference, it's going to affect their relationship with that particular person. It will. It's not going to be the same as if the person didn't use those techniques. And aside from, I would never personally hire somebody that, say, wanted to spank my children. But if I have somebody that's trying to give them Skittles to get in their car seat, it's not the end of the world. It's not something I'm going to do. It's certainly not something I'm going to reinforce. But I also understand that my child's going to be able to see through that. And I know Alex has a lot of experience with this too, because her ex-husband, when they were raising their children, was not this kind of parent. So you guys had this like big dynamic. So it wasn't even a caregiver. It was another parent. Sorry, there's my dog. He's in my
Yes, that was very difficult. I did, however, hire caregivers while I was married, and I ran into the same problem. And it is a balancing act of how where you're willing to draw that line, because yeah, it's people are, well, no one's going to be you, and they shouldn't. And your kids do need to learn to get along with like in the world, and deal with people that are not going to that that are going to act differently. But you don't want to put your kid in a situation that is like pathologically bad for them. I found when I was looking for caregivers, it was better to get young people, like college students, who didn't have a lot of experience. And then I just talked to them, and I actually paid them to read a book. So I would say, just read, when I had babies and toddlers, I said, I'll pay you, I forget how much it was. I think it was like $100 or $200 if you read No Bad Kids by Janet Lansbury. And if you have any questions, ask me. And that was just part of the job, was they would read that and ask me questions. And then I normally spent a week shadowing them. So the first day I would interact with the kids, and I would have them watch and play and interact, but mostly watch. And then by the end of the week, I was stepping back and maybe in the home and would listen from like another room, kind of a thing. But I found young people are more receptive to this than, old grandmas that have been doing this forever, and they're like, I know what I'm doing. You're just a new parent, and you're paranoid or worried about nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. I love that you would pay them to read a book. I think my top choice would be Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. But with young kids, Janet Lansbury is a good one too. That's awesome.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Anybody else want to ask a question or jump in with a comment? I can keep talking about parenting today. Yeah, go for it.
I had a question. So in regards to one of the points was giving them more choices. Can you give me some examples of what you found is helpful? Because I feel like I implement it, but it's on such a small level. Like, does that help? Things like, well, do you want apples or oranges with your lunch? Like, I'm giving them choices, but is that big enough of a choice, or should that be broader, or is that age appropriate with how the kids are?
Yeah, great question. So definitely those kinds of choices are important for kids too. And I would be weary of false choices. So, and it's things that I do this sometimes too, but I realize that it's oftentimes a false choice. Like, be an example of a false choice. It's time to get in the car. Do you want me to carry you, or do you want to walk? And that's
one I use all the time. Yes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll give them that choice, but sometimes I'm really aware that they don't want to get in the car, that neither one of those choices are acceptable for them. And when that's the case, I tend to, I might say it just to give them the opportunity, but after that, it's not about options at that point. It's like, we have to get in the car. We have an appointment. We have to go. We can't miss it. And ultimately, us as parents, we understand the consequences of coming and going. It's our responsibility to get our kids where they need to be. But that doesn't exactly answer your question. So like, there's this thing about false choices that I'd be wary of, that our kids will see through really fast. And things like apples, oranges, that's great. But sometimes include them in bigger decisions. Well, what park do you want to go to today? Or if they say, I don't want to go to bed yet. Okay, what do you want to do? I want to watch a program. Okay, tonight we'll watch an extra program. You want to stay up for an extra hour? Not every night, but maybe let them feel that out, see what it feels like for their body. Again, you as a parent, decide whether or not that's a viable choice for you, because maybe you just know your kid, tonight's not the night for that kind of choice, right? It's been too long of a day and they're completely wore out, and that's just going to set them over the edge. But you can give them choices for things that they don't normally get to choose. And as they get older and older, these kinds of choices are going to change, and they're going to be more meaningful. And some of them might even be things that they might even fail in. You're like, that could be a really big failure, but that's okay, because how much they will learn from that is immense.
Right. Well, I think at this age, I still worry that when I give them choices, it's in something that I feel like I'm catering because I'm a people pleaser. Does that make sense? To where I think I'm struggling with, am I giving them the right type of choices that are good choices, not just like, well, of course you want to watch TV instead of go to bed, but at what point am I just letting you watch too much TV? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely be wary of that too, because so often us as parents, we internally know that we're loosening our limits and our boundaries because we're trying to prevent upset, but there's like an inevitable upset that's going to occur. And that's when we should recognize and get ahead of it if you can, and be like, okay, I don't want to upset my child, but this situation isn't going to end well. And the hope that they're going to get up if I allow this to play through like they think it's going to play through, and it doesn't, it's going to be worse than if I just put my foot down and say no right now. So ultimately, you as the parent absolutely can also say no. You know, there's limits and boundaries, and if you're uncomfortable with something, then I would hold strong on that and leave them to have space to have big feelings. I think that's part of this. Is it's okay for kids to have really big feelings about stuff when we give them the space to have them and accept them and just let them be upset. And Alex, it looks like you have to say something too. Did you want to add?
Yeah. I would say giving choices and what those choices are dependent on the kid and the family dynamics and the you as the parent. And like a good rule of thumb is if you're feeling like you're getting irritated, then you've allowed the situation to go too far.
Okay.
Because you're the adult, you're responsible. Yeah, so you're responsible for your own reaction. And if you're starting to feel irritated, then it is your job to not let, and they have a choice with just apples, because the choice is apple or no apple. So it's not like, and I see someone, Hannah wrote about nutrition and food for Ellen Satter Institute. Division of responsibility is a great method you can read about online, and it talks about how it's a great way to deal with food in the house, and it's basically the parent's responsibility is providing the food, and so like what foods to eat and when, and it's the child's responsibility to decide if they want to eat and how much. And there's more to it than that. Like you should always have something available on the table that you know the child's going to eat, and they can eat as much of it as they want. And if they want to eat strawberries for a whole day, then their belly will ache and they'll learn, and the next day they'll probably eat some meat and potatoes. So, but yeah, I think it's very dependent on, and sometimes choices can set kids off. Like my oldest had a really hard time with choices, and it kind of complicated our morning and set us up on the wrong foot. And I just found it's easier, even now that he's 10, he much prefers I just pick out his clothes and I give him his clothes, and he's like, great, and he'll put his clothes on. He doesn't really want to pick things out and choose sometimes about some things. Other things
I feel like I could relate to that, actually. Sometimes I really wish somebody else was here to help me choose. Like decision fatigue.
Yes.
Let's see. Unconditional parenting. Yes. Unconditional parenting by Alfie Kohn. I can write that down in the group chat here. He's one of my favorite authors. And his perspective on children is really incredible. Food, by the way, food choices, like Alex was bringing up Ellen Satter, division of responsibility, that could be its own like 1 hour discussion because it's it's so complicated, and parents, I think, a lot of times put more responsibility into their children's eating than they have to, and that takes a lot to trust your child and release some of that responsibility onto your child, which is them eating and choosing to eat piece of it and how much. I'm reading Hannah's comment here that people often rely on their kids for help, that they need to rely on us. Yeah, yeah. We have better networks as well. Exactly. We have better networks. And especially kids as they start getting older and older, they will have a friends network, but a lot of times, like if you think about middle school and some of those other challenging ages, their friends aren't necessarily people that they can rely on. Like their friends are creating a lot of the strife in their life, and things start getting complicated there. So, and if our kids feel like they can't come talk to us about problems or issues that are coming up with their friends, that's when stakes start getting higher as they start getting older. It's a great point, and it is really hard because children they're just not going to have people that they can trust in their lives until they're quite a bit older. And adults, if we push them away, it's challenging.
I was kind of hoping to hear maybe if you had any thoughts of tactics. You mentioned how to respond and not react. And I was wondering what tactics one might use. And again, I kind of heard Alex mention that it's like kind of having that awareness of recognizing that you're starting to get annoyed, recognizing that something's starting to bother you. But I am curious if you have any sort of any recommendations, or if you could expound on that in any way, shape, or form, because that's something that at least I know I have a really hard time with, is the mindfulness and having the like peace of mind to respond appropriately as opposed to just lashing out in a strong reaction.
Yeah, that's super challenging. I struggle with this too. Every parent does. Honestly, that's where a lot of the inner work comes from. And so obviously, if you're looking for like legitimate techniques, meditation, therapy can help a lot.
Okay.
I know it sounds crazy. But, a lot of times what's happening when we're reacting like that, it's our own stressors that are firing in our brain. So we're freaking out about something. And yes, if you can catch it ahead of time, if you feel like your kids are starting to do something and you start feeling that feeling like bubbling up, it's a lot better to stop that as soon as you possibly can. Whatever's going on, stop your child as soon as you possibly can, because nothing good is going to come of that. You're not going to suddenly be open to whatever their behavior is. If they're hurting someone, that's something that happens a lot with, I've got 3 young children, and with young siblings, they go after each other. That's the hardest part. But there is a lot of like inner work that you can do to try and be okay with that and just try to respond to it as neutrally as possible. Every single time we respond with a lot of emotion and a lot of anger or a lot of irritation, it actually gives the specific behavior more power. So the child picks up on it, and it oftentimes makes them uncomfortable, but it can also make them wonder, is my parent going to do that again? If I do it this way, does it change the way that they respond? That's by far the hardest thing. And I could recommend actually quite a few books that specifically deal with that topic. I believe the title of one of the books that was so insightful is Being at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Your Worst. I thought it was a very helpful book. But the other thing I would say that's critical in these moments where we just totally lost our shit, um, apologize, because we are human and it's okay to make mistakes. So one, the fact that you recognize that what you did was less than ideal is probably way more powerful than um, pretending like everything was totally normal and fine. So being able to apologize to your child and acknowledge it and just be able to say, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Um, no one should ever talk to you that way. I shouldn't have yelled. That wasn't the right thing to do. I didn't handle that well. Um, that can be a really powerful thing. I think some psychologists even say that the repair is oftentimes more powerful than the damage done uh, by the incident itself.
I think knowing your triggers help. So, learning where you need to draw your own boundaries. Um, another thing that helped me was realizing that I'm not responsible for my kids' emotions. And if they're upset about something, I can empathize, but I don't have to and I can be calm during that. And that was a big um, change that helped me. When my kids got upset, I learned to just be calm and be like, oh, they're upset. They're allowed to be upset. That's okay. They're not being harmed by being upset. And actually, this is one of the things that drew me to this type of parenting, because before I got into respectful parenting, I learned about peaceful parenting. And a lot of peaceful parenting talks about saving children from their emotions. It's almost like you shouldn't let your kid have a negative emotion at all. And that kind of puts you in this position where you are responsible for their emotion, and then you're always trying to make them like happy, and it creates like a really messed up dynamic. So stepping back and letting go and realizing it's okay if they throw a fit, then and you can help. If your child's hungry, feed them, but you don't have to like get wrapped up in all the emotion. Oh, and I gave myself timeouts. If I get really upset, then I usually I like to shake my hands fast, because it just gets like energy out, and I say I need a break, and I go into my room and I shut the door. I breathe and I ask myself, okay, is whatever I'm needing them to, it's usually something I need them to do and they're refusing to do it. And then I think, okay, is this so important that it's worth damaging my relationship with them? And usually the answer is no. And when I realize that, I go, okay, so I can let go of whatever. And I actually, that happened one time, maybe twice, when I was taking them to school. We just had a really bad morning and my kids were freaking out. And I was like, is this day of school really worth like me physically picking them up and putting them in the car, kicking and screaming and throwing? I was like, no, this is not worth it. Let it go. We're going to have a fun day. We're going to have a fun day today. Let's go to the park. Let's do something else.
Mm-hmm.
I see here too, Judd said going outside helps. Absolutely. If you can put yourself in an environment that can help calm yourself too, that's really wonderful. And another thing I've done before that I think is really useful too is getting down on the kids' level. So like literally like sitting down. Like so when I'm standing over them, I'm like more angry. I'm like, just stop it. And I might like actually sit on the ground. And then I'm actually more on their level. So I'm actually seeing things from their perspective all of a sudden, and I'm less threatening to them. So even that can alleviate some tension. And it really just depends, it depends what the circumstance is. Every circumstance is different and everyone's triggers are different. And, every child comes to the table with completely different reactions to things. So it's tough to say what might work for any one person might not work for another. Yeah, Hannah, I tell myself not to take their fit personally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're not responsible for other people's emotions. And that's true for adults as well as children. Alex, is there anything that you want to add or any interesting thing we can share before closing the meeting?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I can't think of anything. The internet went out at my house, so we had to drive down the street, and I'm in a car in a parking lot. But the computer went up. It's a little awkward. I was supposed to be at the house, but it's a bit laggy. I hope I'm coming through okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And sometimes it's a little bit slow. It's totally fine. I really appreciate you making the trip all the way out for that. It's awesome. I'm glad my sister's here. I love her. She's my
Thank you.
main community of support. It's another thing that can really happen with things like triggers, by the way. If you have a community of support where you can call someone and just be able to have someone to talk to and get empathy from, that can be huge. And not just for our children's frustrating behavior. It can be, anything that's going on in our lives is really helpful.
Thank you for putting this on. This is awesome. I love that you're doing this.
Awesome. It's fun. I'm excited to be able to put this on, and I hope people get some use out of it. It's awesome. Well, unless somebody has one last minute thing that they want to mention. Oh yeah, I think of my kids as the greatest teachers of my life thus far. Hannah, me too. I don't think I would be the person I am today without them, and the amount of growth that comes from having these little people in my life is so immense. Like I had no idea. I was a child myself until I had children. It's so amazing. I learned so much from them. Well, I
think of parenting as a privilege.
Yeah.
We get the privilege of raising our kids.
Yeah. Totally. I agree. Yeah, exactly. They grow us up. Yeah. Definitely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting, and I appreciate everyone for coming, and it'll be on again in 2 weeks. And I'm not exactly sure what the topic is going to be yet, but I will let everyone know as soon as I do.
Do you have an email that people can write you and ask questions maybe before the meeting, and we can decide what the topic will be based on those?
Yes, absolutely. So the email is questions@naparenting.com. So if anybody has questions that they want to ask, or something they even want to keep anonymous, or you don't want to forget to ask it, or you want to make sure it gets addressed, or you can't make the meeting and maybe you can listen to the replay, just email it. That's questions@naparenting, as in natural and autonomous parenting, .com, and I will try to address it in this meeting. So, and maybe I'll email or reply. We'll see. I love talking about it. So, and I think a lot of people could learn from other people's questions. So, thank you, everyone, and I'll hope to see you guys back in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, everyone, for coming. I love this.
Thank you.
This is awesome.